Welcome back to the Football by Nico show. Today I'm here with Eric Lyons from Football Sapient. We are going to be talking about the NFC playoff picture for next year. Eric, how you doing?
I'm doing good, man. How you doing, Nico? How's it feeling? How you going? How's your day
I'm doing
been?
good. Yeah, we're ready to get into some of this team analysis. And I
Yeah.
say we started off with the Super Bowl champion LA Rams. What do you
hmm
think about the Rams for next year?
they're still them. The Rams are still the Rams. They're still stacked. They've gotten better this offseason, with the addition of Allen Robinson. And even though trading away Robert Woods and still Odell in limbo, I think this offense is still going to be prolific. I think my concern about the Rams, not a concern, but running the football. They have a good group of running backs, but can they be consistent? Because you don't want Matt Stafford to have to throw the ball 40, 45 times a game in a 17 game season. I don't think you want to put that much pressure on him, even though I'm sure he doesn't mind it. And then this season, I feel like this is a season where teams are going to key in on Cooper Kupp now. Like, after what he did last season, they're not. He's still going to be him. He's still going to do his thing, but he's going to see some doubles and some triples, and all that's going to do is open it up for Allen Robinson. And then what? So the Rams are going to be a problem this year, and their defense is still there. Um, they should be able to run through the West. Honestly, they should be able to run through the West. I mean, you got the Seahawks; they lose Russ. The 49ers, they're still there, but that's going to be the only thing to worry about. The Cardinals, I mean, I don't know, man. With D Hop out for 6 games, we know how Kyler Murray looks without him. I'm not really sold on Hollywood Brown. I didn't like him as a Raven. So I'm looking at the Rams and I'm looking at them like it's honestly looking like they can go back. So as long as everybody stays healthy, of course.
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, I'm going to agree with you. And I think the biggest thing to focus on that you mentioned there was the regression coming for Cooper Cup. And even as a Rams
hmm
fan, I'm going to tell you regression is coming whether you like it or not. And there's no way, he put up historic totals last season. There's no way that happens back to back again. He's still, like you're going to
hmm
be said, he's still going to be at least 1,000 yard wide receiver next year. Going to be very involved in that offense. But Allen Robinson is going to get some more looks this year just because the fact that people are going to be keying in more on Cooper Cup. Similar to the guy on the other side of the ball, they're going to be planning for Aaron Donald. They're going to be planning for Cooper Cup. So it just ultimately ends up, how good is Allen Robinson and Matthew Stafford going to be?
Yep. Yep.
And just
That's
looking at their schedule, I had them around 4 to 5 losses, depending on how that final week goes. Do they need the division? Do they need to win to secure their spot? I think, the last week in Seattle could be a possible loss just because they rest starters.
right.
And just moving on to some of the other division winners this past year, let's talk about the Dallas Cowboys. How confident do you feel in the Cowboys next year, Eric?
Listen, I have always had my strong feelings about all NFC East teams. I can't stand them. I feel like they should be all banned from the playoffs. If they don't win 10 games, they cannot go to the playoffs. These teams, they get to win 8 and 9 games and host a wild card game. It's been going on for years. But as far as the Cowboys go, it's all about Dak and Zeke, man. Like, do you guys want to win, right? Like, how's that going to perform? How is Zeke going to perform? I mean, we've seen Tony Pollard last season step up big time when Zeke wasn't going to. Like, Tony Pollard is a solid running back for the Cowboys. Losing Amari Cooper is big, and I think that's just going to put more attention on CD Lamb. And I mean, listen, man, the NFC East is up for the taking. Quite frankly, I mean, you got Carson Wentz. He's in Washington now. And Carson Wentz isn't the best, but they did need a solid quarterback down there. And then you got the Eagles. You see what Jalen Hurts does because this is, I think, it's a make or break year for him. And then the Giants are a wild card. They have too many problems right now, especially at the quarterback position. So I think it'll be a 3-horse race between the Cowboys, Washington, and Philly. And you know what? I'll go out on a limb here, man. I think Washington steps up this season and takes the NFC East.
Interesting. Yeah, I feel the same way about the Cowboys. obviously you look at their roster, they've got a very solid roster all around. And I think an underrated part of their team last year was their defense. They
Mm-hmm.
had Trayvon Diggs with all those interceptions.
Interceptions, yep.
They added Dante Fowler Jr., who knows how good he'll do, across from DeMarcus Lawrence. Leighton Vander Esch, Micah Parsons, all very solid defensive players. It all comes down to how can they execute, how
Mm-hmm.
can they finish the year. Obviously, they've had a pretty decent record the past couple years, but they just haven't really gone further than the first round of the playoffs, if I'm not
Yep.
mistaken.
Yep.
So,
The last time they were in a divisional round was that 2016 when they won. They won 13-3 and they lost to Green Bay. So yeah, they haven't been that far since.
yeah, and just the fact that Zeke is getting older, Dak is pretty good still, and Michael Gallup has some injury concerns. Their window might be shrinking a little bit. Tyron Smith isn't getting any younger. They got
Hmm.
a decent offensive line, but I think this team needs to win pretty soon. Otherwise, things are going to fall apart for them.
Yeah, I mean, you look back at since that 2016 season, it's been mediocre for them, and this was at that time was a young team, and now this is a young team that's getting older. And even though Mike McCarthy was about to be his second season with them, we know who he is by now. We know what type of coach he is, and we know who Jerry Jones is. So, is there anything big going to change? Probably not. So it's going to be up to the players, and it's, like I said, execution, man.
Yeah. And then moving on to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Obviously, they returned Tom Brady.
Hmm.
He came back from his quote unquote retirement. Who knows how real
Yeah,
that really was?
yeah.
And they returned pretty much their entire roster. Obviously, Gronk hasn't re-signed yet, but they have still got Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, one of the best duos in the league. Got a solid defense still. What do you think about the Bucks next year?
I think the Bucks are still going to be a force to be reckoned with in the NFC. And then you look at that division. I'm not sold on the Saints. I'm not sure. Michael Thomas hasn't reported yet. They still don't know, how ready he is to get back. And I mean, you still do have Kamara. You add Tyrann Mathieu to that defense, but still not really sold on the Saints. Um, I just feel like the NFC South runs through the Bucks right now. I think they're the team to beat, and it's going to take a lot to take them down and to take that division from them. And I just don't see any of the NFC South teams doing that right now.
Yeah. And then just looking at Tom Brady, I feel like he's got another like 2, 3 good years in him. And that's just crazy to say. I mean, last year, I believe he attempted the most passes in his career, put up
Hmm.
5,316 yards, 43 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. That's a great quarterback here. That is probably the best for someone at his age that, can happen.
What I will say about Brady, yes, last year was great, and him and Rodgers were like head to head for MVPs, and Rodgers would end up getting it. I take a look around at the league, and you look at the Josh Allens, the Lamars, the Pat Mahomes, even the Joe Burrows of the world, and then you're going to see what Trevor Lawrence does. I think it's going to be harder for these older guys to be competing when you talk about the best quarterback in the league, that type of conversation. Like, even though Brady's numbers were out of this world last year, if he comes back and puts up okay Tom Brady numbers, how are those numbers compared to a younger quarterback, right? I think it's going to be hard to keep that top level, that top spot of eliteness as far as he goes. But all he has to do is be himself, and that defense and that team. I mean, he stepped into the perfect situation. Even with Todd Bowles about to, take over for head coach, I think that's even better for them. So you add that element to it. Yeah, the Bucks are looking like another solid season for them.
Yeah, I think let me just touch on a point that you said about, the young mobile quarterbacks.
Hmm.
That's never really been Brady's game. I know he's always been more of an IQ football player than he has been a physical football player. And obviously, as you look at the future of the NFL is turning more and more into a passing league. That's why we see the shell coverages last year. They're more and more common because people are just going
Hmm.
to be passing more. It's not really a running league right now. That's why you see mostly committees. But I
Yep.
think that my prediction for Brady, he drops down a little bit maybe, just around 5,000 yards, maybe 30 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, something like that, which is still a good QB season. just
Mm-hmm.
obviously not as good as last year.
Yep.
And moving on to your Green Bay Packers. How do you feel about your team now without their number one receiving weapon?
Um, it's very cliche, but you know the saying: defense wins championships. You trade Devontae Adams, and in return, what you get is you re-sign Preston Smith, you re-sign Rasul Douglas, you re-sign Devondre Campbell. You're able to extend Jair Alexander. That doesn't happen without that trade, and you can't convince me otherwise. You know, if you spend all that money between Tay and Rodgers, you don't get to keep this defense. And the Packers have not had a defense this good in a very long time, and they know that. So they need the defense. And then even you spend money with your in-house, you keep in-house, right? And then you go to the draft, you draft defensively in the draft, which I was fine with. Why not? Why not? Why not? You just make the defense younger and better. And then you draft two receivers late rounds, and they're looking like studs already at OTAs. And the receiver room is still solid. You got Alan Lazard. You got Cobby still in the building. Then you got Amari Rodgers coming off his second year. So it's a lot going on for the Packers. I'm sure they're going to add another free agent that's still out there, whether it be like an Odell or Julio Jones. And we can't even rule out them trading for someone. I think Green Bay is going to be fine. I think this season we'll see more of a ground and pound style of offense for them with a heavy dose of Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon, and then, heavy hitting defense. But Aaron Rodgers is still Aaron Rodgers. I don't think it matters who's running routes out there. He's still going to be himself and still be, potent in that offense.
Yeah, definitely. I know I saw a stat, I think, during when the Arizona game, something like they've never lost a game with Devontae Adams out. I'm not sure if that's
Yeah,
true, but that's
it
just
is.
what I.
It is.
Yeah, so
And
that just goes to show you, how good of a quarterback Aaron Rodgers can be. And, even though people say, he might not trust the young wide receivers,
mhm,
that's just going to come, when you have a wide receiver room that's young,
mhm.
inexperienced, and you have a veteran quarterback like Rodgers.
Yep, and you talk about the undefeated streak without Adams, but they don't talk about are the games where Adams returns from injury. It's always bad. I will never forget this. I forgot what season this was. Might have been 19, right? Maybe 18 or 19. Tay was hurt. He came back, and we played the Chargers. This was before they had their new stadium. And Rodgers was just trying to force it to him the entire game, and it was not working. We got blown out. Same thing happened last season when Tay came back. They tried to force it to him. You can't force feed your number one. I understand it's your number one, but you can't force feed. You look back at the the NFC divisional game this past January, and you got Marquez Valdez-Scantling out. So Rodgers was just eyeing Devontae down the whole game. You take Devontae away from this offense. Yes, you lose the best receiver in football. You lose one of the best tandems ever. But now you have an Aaron Rodgers who has to spread the wealth. And I think not only is going to make him better, and I think it's going to make the team better.
Yeah. Do you think we'll see a little bit more of Robert Tonyan now that he's returning from
Yep.
injury next year?
Yep, he's going to be a big piece of this, big piece of the puzzle too. They're definitely going to incorporate more stuff for him, especially if they keep Mercedes Lewis. He'll be blocking more, and then Tonyan will be the more so the receiving tight end. So I'm excited to see what he does this season returning from that ACL.
Yeah, and then looking at special teams was a big weakness for the Packers last year. Obviously, they went and hired Rich Bisaccia from the Raiders. What do you
Yep.
think about that move?
Hell of a hire. I was so excited about that. I love what Rich did with the Raiders, given the circumstances last season. He's been known to do great with special teams, and obviously, special teams was a downfall of the Packers all season long last year. And the offense and the defense, they were able to cover their tracks, and the Packers were winning ball games. You look back at that 49ers game, it was 10-0 almost the entire game, and the Packers offense just kept going 3-and-out, kept punting the ball. So when the impending doom finally came, where the special teams had their big blowaway, their big laps, there was nothing for the offense. They couldn't do it. They couldn't cover their tracks. Defense played lights out, but the offense they couldn't handle the pressure of having to carry the special teams like they did all season. So you take away worrying about special teams, whether it's punting. We got a new punter. punting, kicking, and Crosby had a terrible year last year. But if the special teams can step up and perform like everybody else, the games are won in three phases of the game. You can't just win it just with your quarterback, just with your defense. Everybody has to be hitting on all cylinders. So I'm excited to see what the special teams looks like.
Yeah, definitely. And then moving back to the NFC West, now we're just going to be covering, some of those other teams within each division in the NFC and just talking about whether we think, they're going to make the playoffs, how far they might go next year.
Gotcha.
So let's start with the Arizona Cardinals. Back in the NFC West, they finished second in the West last year. They had that big undefeated stretch, but then started struggling to close out the year, obviously losing to the Lions. But then you look at next year, you have DeAndre Hopkins suspension. You have Kyler Murray, want another contract. And then you have traded for Marquise Brown. Obviously, this is not going to be a team that stays consistent the entire year from what you've seen from them before. What do you think of them in terms of playoffs next year?
I'm going to tell you who's going to be the best player on the field for them while DeAndre Hopkins is out for those 6 games. It's going to be James Conner. James Conner is one of my favorite running backs. They re-signed him this offseason because of the production he had last year. He ended up becoming the lead back after just was only the third and goal back for the most part of the early part of the season. He became the latter part of the season became the lead back, and now that's he's the premier back in Arizona. And you still got AJ Green. You still got a couple other receivers for the Cardinals, but we know how Kyler Murray is without DeAndre Hopkins, and we know how he is with him. So can they stay afloat during those 6 games will be the tell of that season. If they can start off 4-2, hell, even 3-3, try to stay above 500 and move on to when you get your key guy back. That's going to play a part in if they go to the playoffs or not. If they can't stay afloat during that first 6 games, they're not going to have a good season. And then it's going to really fall on Cliff Kingsbury. I mean, this guy gets an extension after getting blown out in the wild card round. So, now you're starting to look at him.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree on James Conner. Obviously, he scored 18 total touchdowns last year, which is just amazing for a guy that, no one really wanted. If you look at his free agency a couple of years ago, he was kind of one of those guys that flew under the radar a little bit, comes to the Cardinals, gets a fresh start, and does really great. So I think that him and Darrell Williams also, for those fantasy people, we all know Darrell Williams was one of the backups to Clyde Edwards-Helaire, obviously did better in some situations. So I think that they'll be a good 1-2 punch. And just the fact that, Chase Edmonds left, I think Darrell Williams fills that spot really well.
I actually had Chase Edmonds, and then the more I watched the Cardinals games, I'm like, bro, Connor is the one scoring. And I forgot what week I made the switch. I grabbed Connor from waivers, and then my team took off, but my team took a hit. Halloween last year, I lost Derrick Henry, and it was I had an interesting season. Okay, somehow I ended up with the 2 seed, but I don't even want to get into that. It's going to break my heart again. Okay, so let's just move on.
Yeah, definitely. I think that people who drafted James Conner didn't expect that kind of season from him.
No.
I think obviously regression is going to come for him. He's not going to score that many total touchdowns. I'm thinking, around 10 to 15 is his limit.
If they use him like they did at the goal line last year, he could score again because it's like he's unstoppable at the goal line. I don't know what it is, but teams could not. They couldn't. Like, they simply could not. But you do look at him being that premier back now, he's going to get a lot more touches outside of the red zone. And then you look at, who they're bringing in behind him, he'll probably have that goal-to-goal role. So you're right. He may not score as many touchdowns, but I think he's going to get more yards this year, though, for sure.
Oh, 100%. I know last year when I was watching Cardinals games, whether they played the Rams or somebody else, you saw a lot of him used as a wide receiver. They sending him out, getting those receptions. So just, for PPR people, there's one of your guys you should go and target in your drafts.
For sure.
And then moving on to the San Francisco 49ers. I don't think we really need to talk about the Seahawks. Seahawks are pretty much in a rebuild mode right now.
Yeah,
You're not,
yeah.
you're not going to win much with Drew Lock and Geno Smith
Nope.
at quarterback right now. They don't have a great roster built around them. Even when they did have Russell Wilson last year, still ended up with a top 10 draft pick. So I just
Mm-hmm.
think for them right now, they're just trying to focus on developing some of their younger talent.
Yep,
And
for
then looking
sure.
at the 49ers, obviously they made it to the NFC Championship game last year, third in the NFC West. I think they go back to the playoffs with Jimmy Garoppolo. Not so sure about Trey Lance. I know I've heard, a couple people say Trey Lance, hasn't really been impressive in practice. Then you have Debo on his way out, possibly. What do you think about, this team?
Um, I don't know. I don't understand why people give Jimmy G so much flack. I mean, he is a game manager, and I think he knows that, and I think the 49ers know that. So as long as he doesn't turn the ball over, you're good with him. And because he's not a bad quarterback, and when you got a receiver like Debo Samuel, it doesn't matter who your quarterback is. You got Kittle, it doesn't matter who your quarterback is. One thing I will say about the 49ers coming into this season, I think they'll be getting all their running backs back that they lost last season. And I think that'll have an effect on Debo's role in that offense. I don't think he'll be used as a running back as much anymore. If all of their running backs are back, I think he'll go back to being, that key just wide receiver. And they'll still use him here and there. But he doesn't want to be, I don't think he wants to do that anymore, especially if they're not going to pay him to do it. If I'm going to be playing two positions, I want to get paid like I'm playing two positions. If I'm listed as a wide receiver on the roster, but you got me taking 10, 15 carries a game and doing my wide receiver work, but you're going to try to pay me just as a wide receiver, no, that's not going to happen. So I understand where his frustration is. And the 49ers don't have to trade him, but we've seen stars get traded, and they will force their hand. So we'll see what happens with that. But if they lose Debo, I look at the 49ers a lot differently. And I think that him and Garoppolo would be like, I wouldn't say they get traded together, but I think it'll be a domino effect. If Garoppolo goes, I think Debo goes, and vice versa.
Yeah, definitely. Like you said, Debo is a big part of their success last year. And I just think if you lose a guy like him, that's pretty similar to losing almost, a Tyreek Hill or even a Devontae Adams.
Yep.
Because you just look at the rest of their roster, they're built around running the football.
Mm-hmm.
So when you lose a guy that helps you run the football, and he's pretty similar to the way that the Rams use Cooper Kupp in the sense that they just want to try and get the ball into this player's hands and just let
Mm-hmm.
him do his job. I think that when you lose such a big part of your offense, obviously he hasn't really played the like that much in his career. He's had injuries just as the rest of the 49ers have. But I think when you look at this team, they've had success the past couple of years. Went to the Super Bowl just a few years ago. I
Mm-hmm.
think that they're still a playoff team, even if they don't have Debo. Because when you look at that Super Bowl roster, he wasn't really as involved as he was this past year. And just when you look at how they run their offense, they run it through the running backs, obviously. But the fact that Kyle Shanahan has to be able to rotate some of those guys, in and out, and every single one of them has been able to be pretty good for them, shows how good of an offensive playmaker he is.
Yep. And that line, that O line is pretty stacked too. They move people off the ball, and then you still got their defense, which has been great. So yeah, the 49ers will still be there to make some noise, especially in that division where it's like it's the Rams and then everybody else seems to be like in limbo. So they'll still be competing for second place.
Yeah, definitely. And now moving on to the NFC South. Let's talk about the New Orleans Saints.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, you lose Drew Brees a couple years ago. That one was just pretty disappointing, I think, for everybody, including myself. I really wanted him to go out with a win. But then they get Jameis Winston. They get back Michael Thomas. They sign Jarvis Landry, draft Chris Olave. What do you think about that offense next year?
It depends on who the quarterback is. Um, I have no faith in Taysom Hill at all to be a quarterback in this league at all. I think I have more confidence in Jameis Winston, and he's proven to be he can play in this league. He just has to stay healthy and just not turn the ball over. But you just named all the receivers they have, especially if Michael Thomas comes back to his normal self, and you still got Kamara in the backfield. This offense can be pretty solid. And they're gonna make some noise if they can all gel together. They'll definitely make some noise. And they've been missing another receiver down there. I think Thomas, by himself, he put up crazy numbers with Drew Brees. But they've always these last couple of years they've been looking for a number two, and I think Jarvis can be that and more. And then you draft Chris Olave, and that just another threat. And then you still have, what was the kid's name? Short guy. He's so fast. I thought he was going to be like a fantasy gem, but he didn't pan out.
Yeah, Traquan Smith and Marquez Callaway.
Callaway. So he's fast as hell, and you still got Smith too. So they have weapons down there. Don't get it confused. They have weapons. But when you're in a division with the Bucks with all of the weapons, you just don't compare. There's no comparison to be made. But I think the Saints can have a solid year, but it's also going to depend on what that defense can do. Can they get stops and not get 40 points put up on them? So that's what it's going to come down to.
Yeah, definitely. They almost made the playoffs last year. I believe it was because the Rams lost in Week 17 to the 49ers that kept them out.
Yeah.
But then you just look at some of those offensive playmakers, like you said, Alvin Kamara. Really good. Michael Thomas obviously hasn't played in a couple years, but still top wide receiver. Jarvis Landry, great number 2. Chris Olave. We know, as we've seen, for the past couple years, how pro-ready some of these rookie wide receivers are. And Chris Olave, I think, is one of those guys for sure. And you just look at the way Jameis Winston likes to throw the ball down the field. I think you'll see a lot of deep shots next year. I think you'll see a lot of gunslinging from him. Hopefully not as many turnovers. Yep. But I think the offensive line is another underrated aspect of this Saints team. Obviously, you lose Teron Armstead to the Dolphins. You still got, Ryan Ramczyk on the edge. But I think that offense is pretty solid. And I'm looking at, at least a 9-10 win team here.
For sure, I agree.
And then looking at that defense, you got Cam Jordan, you got Marcus Davenport, Demario Davis, Tyrann Mathieu, Marcus May, and Marshawn Lattimore. You got some solid players all around there. Obviously, they signed Tyrann Mathieu, great player. Then you still have Marshawn Lattimore, lockdown corner. And then the veteran presence, between Demario Davis and Cameron Jordan has kind of led that defense the past couple of years. So I would say that their defense has been more consistent than their offense in recent years.
Yeah,
and
for
then
sure.
Moving on to the East, we're going to talk now about the Philadelphia Eagles. Obviously, the Eagles made the playoffs last year, lost to Tom Brady in the first round, but they've technically drafted, I call it drafting, but you trade a draft pick, pretty much the same as drafting.
Yeah.
They had A.J. Brown, and then you just look at the way that they've built their team around Jalen Hurts. They led the league in rushing yards per game last year, and I think they've tailored this offense to his skill set very well. And just that offensive line that they've built for him, I think they're giving him another 2-ish years to prove that he's the guy. And I think he is the guy.
I hope he is, because I do like Jalen Hurts. But you look at, the collapse they had in that wild card game, and just from the start to finish, it looked like they never was able to grasp the fact that they were in a playoff game against Tom Brady. It just didn't look like they showed up to play football. And you look at Jalen Hurts, and this is the year where it's all right, Jalen, look, man, we gave you all the answers to the test. It's up to you to ace it. So I hope he goes out there and performs and excels. And if he does, man, they can make some noise. They really can make some noise, especially in that division that's always so wide open. Always so wide open. You're never out of the NFC East.
Yeah, definitely. I think that the NFC East hasn't had a back-to-back division winner in like something crazy like 40 years.
Yeah, it's been a
Just looking
long
back.
time.
And then you look at their defense. Obviously, they added Jordan Davis, they added James Bradbury, and they added Nakobe Dean. And then obviously he signed Hassan Reddick. And looking at some of those players, their defensive line is going to be nasty next year. And I'm
Oh
so
yeah,
excited to see that because you just have the rotational front of some of those guys. Jordan Davis was, I think, everyone's favorite D tackle in the draft. And I think that him getting after the quarterback, even though he's not much of a pass rusher, he's such a big presence, in the middle, similar to Fletcher Cox, that it's
yep,
going to be hard to run against that defense.
for sure.
So, in my opinion, I think this is the team that's going to win the NFC East next year. I think you're looking at maybe an 11, 12 win team at the max. It all depends on how Jalen Hurts does, though. I think if he plays similar to last season, he was kind of inconsistent at times, but still good in terms of like his rushing. I think you're looking at more of a 9, 10 win team, but I think their max wins is probably about 11 next year. What do you think?
Um, Let me see. Let me pull up their schedule. Check it out.
Yeah, because you look at their schedule, they're going to play all those second win teams next year, and it doesn't look like they have a tough schedule right off the bat. I mean, you start
Yeah,
off with a
no,
really easy one at Detroit.
yeah, you got Detroit, you got Minnesota, Washington, Jacksonville. This is not a bad schedule. Look, you even play the Texans. You got the AFC South, couple NFC North team. I mean, UFC North teams. Yeah, this is not a bad schedule for the Eagles. This is not a bad schedule for them. Yeah, you're right. It's looking like 10 or 11 wins for them, for sure, if they can keep it on track.
Yeah, definitely. I think then you look at Jalen Hurts' development as a passer. How much better can that be? He had Devonta Smith last year as his wide receiver one, and now they
And
go
now
and
you
add
got
AJ
AJ
Brown.
Brown. Yeah, no excuses. No
They signed
excuses.
Zach Pascal, also a little bit underrated signing from the Colts. Jalen
Yep.
Rager, who knows if he's going to be able to put it together next year. But I think even besides from him, the 1-2 of AJ Brown and Devonta Smith will really help him as a passer, kind of silence the doubters in some sense. And now looking at the NFC North, we have the Minnesota Vikings. Obviously, they stole Kevin O'Connell from my Rams, but I think he's going to end up being a really great signing for them. Obviously, the Sean McVay coaching tree has been very good. You have Matt LaFleur, you have who he faced in the Super Bowl, Zach Taylor, and you look at Kevin O'Connell now. He's going to take this offense and I think elevate it to the next level. And the great part about running that kind of Sean McVay offense is you can kind of adapt it to the personnel that you have.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to be running Dalvin Cook out wide a lot. I'm sure everybody saw, Dalvin Cook's been running wide receiver drills in practice. They're going to be using him as, kind of a decoy in some plays, similar to how they use Cooper Kupp. They split him out wide, whether they use him in motion. I think you're going to see a lot of that next year for Dalvin Cook. And just the fact that, they have Alexander Madison behind him too, probably should make things a little bit easier for him in case he does go down. But you look at the wide receivers in this room: Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, KJ Osborne. That's a pretty good trio right there, I think.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to get Irv Smith back. Offensive line, I think, was a little shaky last year, but they've got some young guys on there: Christian Darrisaw, Garrett Bradbury, a couple first-round picks. And then the defense, still got Patrick Peterson, Harrison Smith on the back end, and then Jordan Hicks, Eric Kendricks, Daniel Hunter, and then Dalvin Tomlinson, Harrison Phillips on the line. What do you think about the Vikings offense to start off?
Usually we talk about the running game taking pressure off the quarterbacks, right? But in this case, you're looking at the passing game taking pressure off of your running back. Dalvin Cook is top 5. He's one of the best running backs in the league, and I see him. We play them twice a year, so I know what Dalvin Cook is about. And we saw what happened with Derrick Henry last year with that injury, and we see how these running backs get run in the ground, and they treat them like they're so, what's the word I'm looking for? Expendable, right? But when you got a running back like Dalvin Cook or Derrick Henry, you would like to treat them like they're your star. And you got all these receivers, and you would think that you would try to pass it a little more and try not to, run first. You want to be pass first in this offense, I think. And I think the play action is going to help that a lot. I think Lyon and Dalvin Cook out at wide receiver can help as well, and use just more passing plays for him in general. This offense is going to be something to watch, but it all depends on what Mr. Kirk Cousins, one of the richest men in the NFL, decides to do. Will you get your money's worth for Kirk Cousins? You never know. You never know. But one thing we do know is they're going to keep paying him. And he's going to keep playing. So, and it's like their defense. You add Zadarius Smith to that defense, and that just makes it even better. That front seven. So the Vikings could make some noise this year. They definitely could make some noise this year, but it's all going to be dependent on Kirk Cousins and how the rest of that offense falls in line with his play.
Yeah, I did actually a film study of Kirk Cousins because I was just wondering, what's going wrong with this guy? He puts up pretty good numbers every year, but then he doesn't normally lead the Vikings, that many wins. Mm-hmm. So I was checking out some of his film. A big thing for him is just his consistency and his reads, which was also a big part of Jared Goff's game, making those reads and throwing to the right receiver at the right time. Because you look at Kirk Cousins, sometimes he just won't throw the ball like with anticipation to where the receiver is going to be. He'll just try and force it to a receiver. So I think that his quarterback play just kind of needs to level up in terms of his IQ and everything. And I think he might, throw for 5,000 yards next year if everything goes right.
Yeah, it's going to be up to him, in his preparation and preparing for these games in the season to where he wants to take this team.
Yeah, and then staying in the NFC North, let's talk about the Detroit Lions. Now, the Lions were a better team than their record said last year. Mm-hmm. I think everybody knows that. They lost on, I think, about 3 or 4 games to, game-winning plays. Obviously, you had that Justin Tucker record-breaking field goal. I think you had another one by the Vikings. I'm not entirely sure. I can't remember. But I know
that they tied with the Steelers.
Yeah, they tied with the Steelers. That one was close somehow. But then you look at this team, you look at how Dan Campbell has kind of coached them up. I mean, personally, watching them live at the Rams game last year, I was just mouth wide open the first half because they were just throwing the kitchen sink and more. You saw I think it was 2 fake punts.
Yeah.
And just the trick plays and stuff. It was insane. I was so impressed by the coaching staff in Detroit. And just the fact that they were able to throw the Rams special teams unit and keep it competitive with them for the first half is insane.
Yeah.
So I think you're looking at next year. You add obviously Aiden Hutchinson. You add Jameson Williams in the draft in the first round. Finished 4th last year. Obviously didn't go as well as they would have thought. Had the number 2 pick. But looking into next year, they have a pretty easy schedule when you look at, who they're playing. Starting off with the Philadelphia Eagles. They play the NFC East, and they play Seattle. They also play Jacksonville. So I think that they've got a good amount of easy win teams if they can put it together on their schedule. Mm-hmm. I'm seeing, if everything goes right, if Jared Goff's playing how he was at the end of the year, where he was putting up some good numbers for Jared Goff standards, mind you. But if he plays, similar on that level, I'm seeing about a 9-win team next year. What about you?
Well, as you can see, I'm a Michigan fan, right? So I didn't want to see Aiden Hutchinson go to the Lions because I didn't want to see that freak 2 times a year. Aiden Hutchinson is a guy, right? We know that. Aiden Hutchinson is the real deal, and I think that talent is going to translate right to the NFL. And he's my pick for Defensive Rookie of the Year already. I think he's going to do that. The Lions, talk about Dan Campbell, bro, even up until the last week of the season when they were down and out and, no playoff berth was nowhere near them, they still went out there and played for that guy. They got up for him. That's what it comes down to. People forget how important coaching is in this league. We all, we talk about analytics and stats and numbers and strategy-wise, but Dan Campbell is just somebody who will fire you up, and that a lot of coaches don't have that. Like they'll talk to you, they can get the locker room, but can we buy into you? And I think that everybody on that Lions roster has bought into what Dan Campbell is selling, and if all goes right, like you said, this could be a potential maybe breakout year for them. They've been down for a long time. I think a wild card berth for the Lions would be great. I think that would be a win for them. So we'll see. And we all know, who the boogeyman is in the North. We know that. And to have success, you don't necessarily have to beat the Packers 2 times a year. So that shouldn't be, where they start to measure their success at. I think that the Lions can still have success outside of the NFC North and still make some noise this season.
Yeah, definitely. And you just look at this offense, some of the weapons that Jared Goff has been given. You start off with DeAndre Swift and Jamal Williams, both solid running backs. I think Jamal Williams got him from the Packers, obviously. And were you upset about that?
I understood it. I know people don't understand. It's a business at the end of the day, and I know how things work. We all do. We should all, as fans, understand that. But Jamal being a fan favorite, a guy who I enjoy, I love his energy, and his energy, it shows on the field. He's a hell of a running back, man. I always enjoyed him, and I love what he's doing in Detroit, and I think that this year could be even a bigger year for him. You talk about that offense, man. T.J. Hawkinson, I love him. Hell of a tight end. Hell of a tight end. I love Hawk, bro. He is a dog.
Yeah, and just looking at, some of the other running back talent, Craig Reynolds and Jamar Jefferson, I believe those guys were solid as well when we saw them, within the rotation. And then Jamal Williams, like you said, great player. I remember when I owned Aaron Jones. I don't know why I was thinking Aaron Jones. Maybe that's what the connection with my brain was. Yeah, I owned him in fantasy a couple years ago when he just went absolutely off in that Cowboys game.
Yep.
And my big thing watching the Packers when I was trying to see, my main running back was, why is this Jamal Williams guy in all the time?
Mm-hmm.
He got a lot of the passing work. He got a lot of those, quick receptions, throws to the outside, just because he was a good back.
Yeah, and he just has this
next year.
This burst about him, and he just doesn't go down. His legs don't stop until the whistle blows. He is a guy that will play through the whistle, and I really like what he does. But yeah, I had Aaron Jones that year too, and I would get so frustrated when Jamal was in there for long stretches. I'm like, bro, we got to get 33 back on the field. But yeah, Jamal Williams is a hell of a running back though, and it's funny, we talk about the 5 touchdown games. We didn't talk about Washington, but it was one thing I only wanted to talk about with Washington in the NFC East was that Antonio Gibson, man. I don't know what happened there. I don't know what happened there. They keep J.D. McKissick. I thought McKissick was gone. I was like, okay, well now it's time for Gibson to take the top off. But McKissick ends up re-signing, and now you're back to the 1-2 punch. And Antonio Gibson had that Thanksgiving game against the Cowboys. And I picked him up. I traded for him in fantasy that year. That was his rookie year. Then he got hurt, and then we never really saw that type of run from him again. So that frustrated me. That was a thought I just had. But back to the Lions, though. Yeah, Jamal Williams is a guy, and I think the Lions are going to be all right.
Yeah, and then you look at their receiver room. Obviously, a couple young receivers start off. The depth chart. You got Amon-Ra St. Brown. He exploded onto the scene last year. I think everyone in fantasy, that was a late waiver wire pickup. Got DJ Chark, another solid wide receiver coming in from Jacksonville. Didn't have the best year last year, but with Trevor Lawrence, I don't think anyone on that offense really did. But he was a solid wide receiver before as well. And I think you look at Jameson Williams coming in, he's not expected to come in and play, to the level that he was at Alabama. So I think that'll be good for him to not, be immediately forced into a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 1 situation up in Detroit. And just Josh Reynolds as well. Jared Goff has a good amount of chemistry with Josh Reynolds from their time on the Rams. Yep. So I think that he will probably see the field more to start off the year as Jameson Williams kind of to get back into football. But then you look at T.J. Hawkinson, like we said, he's a guy. The Lions' offensive line as well. You got Frank Ragnow. You got Penny Sewell. You got Halapulivati. Vata. I know I just butchered that name, but I know those guys are all solid. I think it's an underrated offensive line. Taylor Decker covering his blind side. I think that they're a pretty solid team around Jared Goff, and I think that if he's able to capitalize off of the fact that his offensive line is going to get him that time, that's when he's the best version of himself. Is when he has a clean pocket, when he's able to sit back there and make his reads, is when he's able to play to that 2018 Jared Goff level.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I like Jared Goff. I really do. I think he got dealt a bad hand in LA, after that Super Bowl loss. It was, kind of all downhill from there. But, we know what that was about, man. He lost his guy, Cooper Kupp, injuries to Cooper Kupp, injuries to Ty Gurley. He kind of fell off the wagon. I thought that a fresh start, unfortunately, his fresh start had to be in Detroit. But I think that he can get back to being, that guy he was in 2018. So I'm excited to see how he does in the second year in this Detroit offense.
And then wrapping it up with our final deep analysis of a team, we're going to finish off with the Washington Commanders. Added Carson Wentz this past offseason, drafted Jahan Dotson in the first round. And then on defense, you obviously have the defensive front seven of, I think, like 5 or 6 first-round picks, which I think is crazy. Mm-hmm. Chase Young, Deron Payne, Jonathan Allen, Montez Sweat, Jamin Davis, Kendall Fuller, Cameron Curl, Bobby McCain, Willin Jackson on the back end. I think this is a pretty solid team. I think that Carson Wentz is a better quarterback than they had last year. I think he's probably the best quarterback they've had in recent years, between Ryan Fitzpatrick, Taylor Heineke. He put up decent numbers last year, like we already talked about with Kirk Cousins. His stats aren't terrible. It's just kind of his general level of play, his decision-making during the games that kind of loses you games.
On my podcast, I give Carson Wentz hell every season. I call Carson Wentz Tim Tebow with a shooter sleeve. But no, all jokes aside, Carson Wentz is like the Derrick Rose of the NFL. It's like we saw his potential, his peak, that year when the Eagles went to Super Bowl. He has this freak injury, and he just never adapted his play. Like, he still plays like he never tore his knee like that. Like, he never adapted his game. And in order for him to be successful, he has to do that. He has to understand that you can throw the ball away. You do not have to make a play every play. You do not have to keep a play alive. If it's not there, go down. You don't have to take a sack or sprain both of your ankles in one play. You don't have to do that. You know what I mean? And Carson has to understand that at this stage in his career, you're not getting too many more chances. This is it for you. This is it. Honestly, this is it. I mean, the Colts really sold for you last year, and it didn't work out. They got rid of you after one season, and now you're back in the NFC East, an easier route to the playoffs. But I didn't think it got any easier than having to just beat the Jags in the last week of the season. But I guess, that's just too hard for him. So now you come into a different team. I wouldn't say a worse team, but definitely a step below the Colts. And, but listen, he has weapons there. Terry McLaurin is one of my favorite receivers. And I think that he's going to take another step and, breaking into that top 10 with Carson Wentz. And you got the 1-2 with Antonio Gibson and J.D. McKissick in the backfield. The recipe is there for Carson Wentz, man. This is the second season in a row where he has good running backs, a solid defense, a couple weapons with in the passing game. It's just up to him. It really is. It starts and ends with him, man. You have to stay healthy, and you have to play the game, not play your game. You have to play the game. With the Carson Wentz way, it's not the right way to play right now. You have got to adjust your game and, to just keep your game long. You want to be in this league longer than 35 years old, but you don't want your body breaking down before then. So he has to adjust his game and become more of a pocket passer than the scrambler that he used to be, because he's not that guy anymore.
Yeah, definitely. I think that Terry McLaurin is probably the best wide receiver he's ever had. I don't think, Michael Pittman Jr.
Oh
is
yeah,
as good as him. I think you have. I think it was Alshon Jeffrey, just a
yeah,
combination of like Jalen Rager and some of those guys in Philly. I don't think they're as good as Terry McLaurin. I think Terry McLaurin is pretty similar to Matt Stafford in terms of like if they or Allen, let's say Allen Robinson. I think that's a more accurate comparison. If they had a QB, what would happen? I think you're
mm-hmm.
going to see that he'll probably do better than he did last year, just because Carson Wentz is probably the best QB he's ever had.
Oh yeah,
You just look at the rest of the team. They've got a solid team, like we said, weapons. Re-signed J.D. McKissick. He was a great, third down back role player from them last year. Antonio
yeah,
Gibson, like we said, solid running back. And then Curtis Samuel from the Panthers a couple years ago through signing. Jahan
yep,
Dotson, Diami Brown. He has all the weapons that I think he needs. I mean, they're not great weapons, like we talked about. He's not like Kirk Cousins in Minnesota that has Dalvin Cook, Justin Jefferson. But this is
yeah,
a solid team. This is a
oh yeah.
team that, you know, he can win games with. And I think that if he doesn't win games with, I don't know who is going to take him. Maybe the Panthers, but otherwise, he's
This
pretty much
this
done.
yeah, this might be it for him, man. This might be it. I don't think that he starts anywhere else if this doesn't go right. Like if this does not go right for him, he's not a starter in the NFL no more. It just can't be.
Yeah, next year, I think for the Commanders, it's just kind of to get situated with Carson Wentz. I think
Mm-hmm.
they've got a decent schedule. I would say probably middle of the pack, just looking at it. Starting off with Jacksonville, so Carson Wentz can, exercise those demons from last year in week one, finally beat Jacksonville. Maybe. Who knows? We'll have to see. But I think that I wouldn't say competing for the NFC East title. I see them around 7 to 8 wins next year at the minimum. Obviously, they have a better team around it, but it just depends on how Carson Wentz plays next year.
Yeah, for sure. For
And
sure.
then to wrap up the podcast, let's just talk about some of the other teams we didn't discuss quickly. We have the Giants in the NFC East. Those guys, I think, are still in a rebuild. I don't know if they're
Yeah.
ready to contend just yet, but they have a
No.
couple pieces there. It's
And they
just,
had a great draft too. They had a great draft too.
yeah,
I
Kayvon
enjoyed what they did in the
Thibodeau.
draft. Yeah.
And I think it's just up to them to kind of develop some of their young talent, maybe draft a quarterback next year, because I don't think Daniel Jones is that guy.
Nope, and they know that. That's why they didn't pick up that option. So I think that this is it for him this season. And I also think that the writing may be on the wall for Saquon Barkley. And you hate to see that because he was such a great running back coming out of college, but he cannot stay healthy. And I don't think he's going to be a part of this rebuild.
Oh, 100%. I think that they're going to try and trade him, to a contender. I believe the Rams had some interest. I saw a rumor about that, but, rumors were rumors.
I think if they trade him, I think they trade him out of the NFC, but I think he stays. I think he actually goes to the state of New York because the Giants aren't in New York; they're in New Jersey. But I think he goes to the state of New York and becomes a Buffalo Bill. I think the Bills are one legitimate running back away from the Super Bowl.
Definitely. Yeah, and then you just look at that offensive line. I think that's a big reason why Saquon, kind of has had these issues. It's just because he's running
Yeah,
behind an offensive line that is Swiss cheese, pretty much.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And then the Chicago Bears, kind of similar situation to the Giants. A young quarterback, not a great roster around him, but a couple pieces here and there. Obviously, you got Darnell Mooney, Justin Fields, Roquan Smith on the other side of the ball, Keem Hicks. I think that they're in a similar situation to the Giants, kind of build around that young quarterback, and then eventually, try and compete in the North. But for
yeah.
now, it's not looking good for the Bears next year, I think.
Mm-mm.
And then the Falcons, I think you can call this shot right now. I think they're a top 5 pick next year. No doubt
Oh
about it.
I honestly forgot they even played. Man. I forgot they were down there in the NFC South. Well, they're cooked. They're cooked.
Yeah. Similar to the Falcons, Carolina Panthers, I think
Oh
top
yeah,
10 maybe is
they're
in
in
the
trouble,
ballpark for
man.
him.
They're in trouble. They're in
Yeah.
trouble. And
Sam
you
Darnold,
you
I
gotta
don't know
feel
about him.
bad for Christian McCaffrey. I mean, the guy's already given up his body, but he did get paid. So I mean, you can't feel too bad for him. But you hate to see these talents on these awful teams, bro. It really pains me to see that. Like that's why it's unfortunate to see the Titans are about to regress big time in Tennessee, and I hate to see that for Derrick Henry. Like that's why it makes me not upset because I don't give a damn about the Cowboys, but you got Zeke, man. He can be so much better than he is, but this Cowboys team is already so good. So he's spoiled with a great team, and it's like he does not play like that. And then you look at a Christian McCaffrey in this situation who balls out when he's healthy, but still can't win football games and, you know, have that success. So it sucks, man, to be a running back in this league sometimes.
Yeah, the Panthers do have a couple good pieces on their roster, so I think maybe we might see a rebuild within the next couple years. You know, DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson, both solid wide receivers, just never had the quarterback really. You know, Robbie
Yeah,
Anderson went from Sam Darnold in New York to Sam Darnold in Carolina. And
yeah,
then you got, you know, they picked Icky in the draft. You have Austin Corbett, who they signed. Those are solid role players as well. And I think just looking at the roster right now, I'm seeing looking like they're Rams South. You know, you got Austin Corbett there. Looks like they're the ones that signed Corey Littleton. And then they also have Johnny Hecker at their punter. Who knows? You
yeah.
got a Rams reunion down there in Carolina.
Yes, sir.
And then Brian Burns, I know he's a guy that they've been trying to sign, but he's been disgruntled, I think is what the rumor was. He was a first round pick, obviously, in 2019. Solid player. Last year, 9 sacks, 2 forced fumbles. I think that he might be the start. If he gets traded, I think they just blow it all up next year.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, for sure.
And I think that is going to do it for our analysis. Let's talk playoff picture next year. For me personally, I'm just going to go division by division, tell you who my division winners are, and then who the wild cards are, in my opinion, and then I'll let you do the same. Obviously, NFC West, going to be the Rams, no doubt about it. NFC South, same thing, going to be the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. NFC North, I think it'll still be the Packers, like we talked about with Devontae Adams and everything. Still be the Packers. And then the NFC East, I have the Eagles winning that division, the Cowboys being a wild card, and then the Vikings being a wild card. What about you?
For the North, I'm taking the Packers. For the South, I'm taking the Bucks. For the East, I'm going to take Washington. And for the West, I'm going to take the Rams. Wild card teams. Give me San Francisco. I think they get back as a wild card. And give me Philly. I think that Washington and Philly will be 1 and 2. I think that the Cowboys, I don't think that their ability to be good is going to be good enough this season. I think the NFC East is going to be far more competitive than they expect it's going to be.
Okay. Well, that is just about going to do us for today. Thanks so much for coming on, Eric. Go ahead and plug your stuff.
Follow me on Twitter at Eric Lyons TV. Subscribe to my podcast, Electrified with Eric Lyons. It's available on all DSPs. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, Electrified TV, for all of the visuals. And I appreciate you for having me on, Nico. This is a great, upstart that you have going on here. You've had some good guests on so far, so I've been honored to be one of them.
All right. You have a great rest of your day. Thanks so much for coming on.
Yes, sir, of course.
To be updated every time a new episode of the podcast drops, you can follow me at Football by Nico on Twitter. Thanks so much for listening.